The most dangerous lies are the ones everyone willingly believes. By the time Damien Cole inherited the Cole family name, people had already decided what kind of man he was. Ruthless, calculating, untouchable. They never saw the sleepless nights that followed his father's assassination. They never heard the endless meetings where older men questioned whether a 34-year-old could keep an empire from tearing itself apart. They only saw the tailored suits, the black SUVs, and the silence that followed him into every room. I first saw him from the opposite side of a polished mahogany table inside my father's office. He never looked at me for more than a second. That was exactly what I had spent 2 years making sure would happen. My name is Ivy Chen, and everyone believed I became Damien Cole's wife because my father owed his family $10 million. They were wrong. Every dollar of that debt had been built by my own hands. 2 years earlier, my father had owned a respectable investment firm. Nothing spectacular, but enough to give us a comfortable life. Then came a string of disastrous business decisions that appeared completely accidental. One failed acquisition, one vanished investor, one impossible refinancing agreement, one desperate loan after another. Everyone blamed bad luck. No one noticed the invisible fingerprints hidden inside spreadsheets, shell companies, and perfectly timed financial reports. I had created every piece of it, every signature, every transfer, every legal document that slowly pushed my family toward a debt no honest businessman could escape. By the time the number reached $10 million, there was only one creditor left willing to collect: Damien Cole. The timing could not have been more perfect. His father was gone. The Cole organization was fractured. Rival families questioned his authority. Members of his own council demanded he secure a political marriage with one of their allies before they pledged complete loyalty. Damien refused every proposal. Marrying into another powerful family would hand someone else influence over his decisions. He needed another solution. Then my father's file landed on his desk. A bankrupt businessman, a beautiful daughter, a debt large enough to justify an arrangement nobody would question. It looked like fate. It was mathematics. I remember watching the security footage Nathaniel obtained from inside Cole Tower. Damien opened the folder only once. He studied the numbers, flipped through my photograph, closed the file. Then he said 5 simple words: "Prepare the marriage contract tomorrow morning." That was the first move he believed he had made. In reality, it was mine. Nathaniel smiled as the recording ended. "Congratulations," he told me. "You're officially invited inside the most protected house in the city." I nodded, pretending confidence while my pulse echoed inside my ears. Nathaniel had trained me for years to disappear inside plain sight. Financial intelligence, behavioral analysis, memory exercises, corporate law, digital security. He taught me that the safest disguise was never beauty or wealth. It was being underestimated. "Remember," he said before I left, "never let Damien see the woman you really are." I promised I wouldn't. 3 weeks later, I stood beneath crystal chandeliers wearing an ivory dress that felt heavier than armor. Reporters waited outside the estate gates. Business leaders smiled for photographs. Members of the Cole family whispered behind polished glasses of champagne, wondering how a bankrupt businessman's daughter had become their new queen overnight. No one asked whether the bride had chosen this life. That assumption protected me better than any bodyguard ever could. Damien extended his hand without emotion. His expression remained calm, almost distant, as though he was signing another contract instead of beginning a marriage. Everyone believed he owned the board. They never imagined the quiet woman beside him had arranged every piece long before the first move was played. The reception unfolded exactly the way powerful families preferred their celebrations to unfold. Polished smiles, expensive music, careful conversations, and invisible negotiations hidden beneath every toast. I stood beside Damien, like another carefully selected decoration, while photographers captured images that would appear on the front pages before sunrise. My new husband never once reached for my hand, unless a camera pointed in our direction. The moment each flash disappeared, so did the illusion. That distance was not a disappointment, it was a gift. The less attention he gave me, the more freedom I gained. Marco remained only a few steps away throughout the evening. Damien trusted him more than anyone else inside the estate, and I could immediately understand why. Marco watched everything. He noticed who refilled Damien's glass. He noticed which council member whispered too long with another family. He even noticed when I glanced toward the second-floor balcony for less than 2 seconds. His instincts were exceptional. I quietly reminded myself never to underestimate him. As the orchestra shifted into another elegant piece, Damien accepted congratulations from several council members before turning toward Marco. They believed I had drifted far enough away while greeting elderly relatives near the ballroom entrance. They underestimated how clearly polished marble carried quiet voices. Damien accepted a glass of sparkling water without looking in my direction. $10 million, he said calmly. That is all she ever cost. Marco remained silent. Damien continued, almost amused. Look at her. She does not belong in this room. She is here because numbers made sense, nothing more. Once the council is satisfied, she will stay out of my way, and I will stay out of hers. Marco finally answered. You sound very certain. Damien gave a faint smile. She is harmless. I lowered my eyes before anyone noticed the expression that almost escaped me. A tiny smile appeared at the corner of my lips before disappearing behind another polite greeting. Harmless, invisible, unimportant. Nathaniel could not have designed a better beginning if he had written the script himself. Every successful operation depended upon one simple principle. People never protected themselves from someone they had already dismissed. Later that evening, members of the household escorted me through the east wing of the Cole estate. The mansion felt less like a home and more like a museum built by generations determined to leave monuments behind. Oil paintings stretched across hallways. Imported marble reflected warm light beneath towering ceilings. Security cameras blended almost seamlessly into carved woodwork. Every door required coded access, except the rooms reserved for family. Sophia found me studying an old portrait near the grand staircase. Unlike everyone else, she smiled with genuine curiosity instead of obligation. You must be exhausted, she said softly. This house overwhelms almost everyone the first week. I smiled back. I think it may take longer than a week. She laughed quietly. Probably. There was kindness in her voice that I had not expected to find inside the Cole family. She offered to show me the library, the gardens, even the breakfast room where staff gathered before dawn. None of the information seemed important. All of it was. People revealed far more through ordinary routines than formal meetings. By midnight I was finally alone inside the bedroom, prepared for Damien's new wife. The room overlooked the city skyline, nearly 40 stories below. I waited exactly 12 minutes before opening the small jewelry case resting inside my suitcase. Hidden beneath an ordinary pearl necklace sat a paper-thin, encrypted communication device. One gentle touch illuminated a single sentence already waiting for me. Nathaniel's message contained only 6 words. Become invisible, then learn everything. I locked the device away before anyone could discover it. Outside my door, footsteps echoed through the hallway before fading into silence. Somewhere else inside the estate, Damien was almost certainly planning tomorrow's meetings, convinced his greatest challenge lived beyond these walls. He had no reason to suspect that the quiet woman everyone ignored had already begun memorizing every hallway, every security pattern, every face, and every secret waiting to be uncovered. I quickly learned that every mansion had 2 versions of itself. There was the one guests admired with polished marble floors, priceless artwork, and carefully rehearsed elegance. Then there was the invisible version, hidden beneath routines that no one questioned. Within a week, I became part of those routines. Every morning I greeted the house staff with the same quiet smile. I thanked the cooks. I complimented the gardeners. I apologized whenever I believed I had interrupted someone's work, even when I had not. People stopped watching me, because I became wonderfully predictable. Damien left the estate before 8 every morning, unless the family council demanded an earlier meeting. Marco reviewed the security reports in the West office at exactly 8:30. Sophia spent Tuesdays volunteering at a children's education foundation before returning shortly after lunch. The accountants arrived every Thursday carrying identical black leather cases. None of these details appeared important on their own. Together they formed a map. Nathaniel used to tell me that information was never hidden. It was simply scattered among ordinary moments that everyone else ignored. I spent hours inside the library pretending to read novels while quietly studying the shelves surrounding Damien's private office. The estate architect had designed the library decades earlier, connecting it to several executive rooms through concealed service corridors that allowed employees to replace books and refreshments without interrupting meetings. The passages still existed. Most of the younger staff barely remembered them. I discovered one, disguised behind a movable bookshelf, filled with old legal encyclopedias. It led to a narrow hallway, no wider than 3 feet, lined with maintenance panels and silent ventilation ducts. From there, I could hear fragments of conversations inside the conference room whenever the family council gathered. I never lingered long enough to create suspicion. 5 minutes here, 3 minutes there, small pieces collected over time always revealed more than one reckless risk. Damien continued treating me with polite distance. He never insulted me directly after the reception, but neither did he invite me into his world. We shared breakfasts only when schedules happened to overlap. He asked whether I had slept well. I answered that I had. Then silence returned between us, as naturally as breathing. To everyone around us, we appeared like two strangers, honoring a carefully negotiated agreement. I encouraged that impression. One afternoon, I carried a tray of coffee toward the conference room after one of the senior housekeepers mentioned that the assistants were running behind schedule. Nobody questioned why Damien's wife wanted to help. They simply thanked me and returned to their work. As I entered, conversation immediately softened. Damien accepted his cup with a brief nod before returning his attention to several financial projections displayed across a large screen. I lowered my eyes, appearing uninterested, while quietly reading the reflected numbers on the polished conference table. Offshore holding companies, international shipping subsidiaries, charitable foundations with unusually complex accounting structures. It was exactly the type of network Nathaniel believed concealed something much larger. I left the room less than a minute later, carrying the empty serving tray, my expression calm despite the dozens of figures already committing themselves to memory. That evening I reconstructed every number inside a notebook written entirely in harmless recipes. Measurements replaced account codes. Ingredients replaced company names. Anyone reading the pages would believe I had become interested in cooking. Nathaniel had taught me years earlier that the safest hiding place was often the most ordinary one. Yet something unexpected began happening inside the estate. Sophia increasingly sought my company. She invited me into the gardens, introduced me to longtime employees, and shared childhood stories about Damien before responsibility had transformed him into the guarded man everyone now feared. She described a brother who secretly funded scholarships, repaired old motorcycles with neighborhood teenagers, and never forgot an employee's birthday. None of those stories matched the image Nathaniel had built for me. I reminded myself that affection could distort memory. Still, doubt quietly entered places where certainty had once lived. Late one evening I passed Damien's study and noticed the door standing slightly open. He remained alone, jacket folded across a chair, reading page after page beneath a single desk lamp while the rest of the mansion slept. Exhaustion showed in the way he rubbed his eyes before reaching for another document. For just 1 second he looked less like the untouchable head of an empire and more like a man carrying weight no one else could see. I walked away before he noticed me, repeating the same warning inside my mind over and over. Never confuse the target with the mission. Never forget why you came. Even so, for the first time since stepping inside the coal estate, those words required far more effort to believe. Nathaniel always insisted that trust was the most expensive currency in the world, because once someone gave it to you, they stopped checking your hands. 3 weeks after the wedding, I requested permission to visit my father for the first time. No one questioned the decision. A newly married daughter visiting her struggling family looked completely ordinary. Damien approved it with a brief nod, before returning to the documents covering his desk. "Take whatever time you need," he said without looking up. "Marco will arrange transportation." I thanked him with the same quiet voice everyone expected from me. By noon the next day, the black sedan stopped outside my father's modest townhouse. Security officers remained outside while I stepped through the front door carrying a small gift basket filled with fruit and tea. It was another carefully staged performance. My father greeted me with genuine relief because only he and one other person understood why this marriage had happened. After exchanging a few ordinary words about the house and my health, he quietly excused himself and disappeared into the backyard exactly as planned. Seconds later, another man entered through the study. Nathaniel never rushed. He closed the door behind him with practiced calm, before removing his gloves one finger at a time. His silver hair made him appear older than he truly was, but his eyes remained impossibly sharp, studying every change in my expression before I even spoke. "You are adapting faster than expected," he said. "Tell me about Damien Cole." I handed him several folded recipe pages from my purse. To anyone else, they were harmless cooking notes. Nathaniel glanced over them only once, before understanding every hidden code. His faint smile revealed satisfaction. Holding companies, shipping subsidiaries, foundation accounts, excellent work. I remained silent. Something about accepting his praise felt different than it once had. He noticed immediately. "What is troubling you?" he asked. I hesitated for only a moment. "The family is not what we expected." Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. "Explain." I described Sophia's kindness, the loyalty of long-time employees, and the pressure Damien carried from the family council. I even admitted that he treated everyone with more restraint than the reports had suggested. Nathaniel listened without interruption, before folding his hands together. "Compassion is often the most convincing disguise powerful people wear," he replied. "Do not confuse discipline with innocence." I wanted to believe him. For years, his judgment had shaped everything I knew. He had rescued me after my mother's death, financed my education, and trained me to see patterns no ordinary analyst could recognize. He never called himself my father, but he had filled every empty place where one should have stood. Questioning him felt almost impossible. "Your objective has not changed," he continued. "The Cole organization is connected to financial channels that threaten thousands of honest businesses. Somewhere inside that estate is the proof. Find it before someone else destroys it." I nodded automatically, even as uncertainty settled deeper inside my thoughts. Before leaving, Nathaniel handed me a small antique fountain pen. "A wedding gift," he said with a smile. "It writes normally, but it also stores encrypted data, much safer than paper." I accepted it carefully. Another tool, another reminder that every ordinary object could hide a second purpose. When I returned to the estate that evening, Sophia welcomed me with homemade cookies she insisted the kitchen staff had taught her to bake. Her cheerful voice echoed through the hallway, as though nothing complicated existed beyond those walls. I thanked her sincerely, before walking toward my room. Halfway down the corridor, I noticed Damien, standing alone beside a window overlooking the gardens. Sunset reflected across the glass, turning the entire room amber. He looked tired, not physically, but emotionally, as though every decision demanded another piece of himself. He glanced toward me. "Your father is doing well?" he asked. "He is," I answered. "Thank you for asking." He nodded once. "Family deserves that much." Then he quietly continued toward his office. The conversation lasted less than 20 seconds, yet those 4 simple words remained with me long after he disappeared. Family deserves that much. Nathaniel had spent years teaching me how to uncover hidden motives behind every sentence. This time, for reasons I could not explain, I wondered whether there had been no hidden motive at all. The first crack in any carefully built plan never arrives with noise. It arrives with a single moment that refuses to fit the story you have been telling yourself. Mine came on a grey Thursday afternoon. I had been organizing old financial reports inside the library, after one of the accountants accidentally left several folders on a side table. At least that was what everyone believed I was doing. In reality, I was comparing account numbers I had memorized with the hidden network Nathaniel wanted me to uncover. The patterns were beginning to connect, but not in the direction I expected. Before I could finish copying another sequence into my coded notebook, raised voices drifted through the partially open conference room door. I slipped into the familiar service corridor and listened through the narrow ventilation panel. One of the senior council members argued that several neighborhood businesses should be sacrificed to satisfy an international investment group demanding immediate returns. The proposal sounded perfectly legal on paper, but I understood exactly what it meant. Hundreds of employees would lose their jobs. Family-owned companies would disappear. The council member called it an unavoidable business adjustment. Damien called it unacceptable. His voice remained calm, but every word carried quiet certainty. "We inherited responsibility along with our name," he said. "If protecting this family requires destroying innocent families, then we have already failed. Silence followed. Another council member reminded him that refusing the proposal could weaken his position with powerful partners overseas. Damien answered without raising his voice. Then I will find another solution. We will not solve one problem by creating 100 more. I stood motionless behind the wall, waiting for the ruthless leader Nathaniel had described to finally appear. He never did. The meeting ended with frustrated footsteps and disappointed murmurs. Damien remained alone inside the room long after everyone else had left. Curious despite myself, I carefully looked through the narrow opening. He loosened his tie, closed his eyes for several seconds, and rested both hands against the conference table. For the first time since entering the estate, he looked exhausted rather than powerful. Marco entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. You could have agreed with them, Marco said. They would have stopped questioning your leadership. Damien accepted the cup with a tired smile. Leadership earned through fear disappears the moment someone stronger arrives. Marco shook his head. Your father would have handled this differently. Damien stared out the window overlooking the gardens. That is exactly why I refuse to. The words settled heavily inside my thoughts. Everything Nathaniel had taught me insisted that powerful men carefully manufactured kindness whenever someone might be watching. But Damien believed he was alone except for Marco. There had been no audience, no performance, only conviction. That evening I returned to my room, unable to focus on the encrypted notes hidden inside my fountain pen. Instead, I replayed every sentence I had overheard. Something no longer added together. According to Nathaniel, the coal organization had become the center of a financial network willing to destroy anyone standing in its way. Yet every document I found suggested Damien had been blocking aggressive proposals instead of approving them. Every quiet conversation pointed towards someone resisting pressure, rather than creating it. I tried convincing myself that I simply had not uncovered the complete picture. Still, doubt spread through my thoughts like ink across paper. The following morning, Sophia invited me to join her at a local community center, funded by the Coal Foundation. Children laughed across the basketball court, while volunteers organized school supplies for the upcoming semester. I expected cameras and public relations managers. There were none. Damien arrived almost an hour later, wearing a simple navy jacket instead of an expensive suit. He greeted the volunteers by name, asked several students about their college applications, and quietly authorized additional funding after learning that the center needed new computers. Nobody applauded. Nobody recorded the moment. He simply signed the paperwork and left before lunch because another council meeting awaited him. Watching him drive away, I realized something far more dangerous than any hidden account or encrypted document. The man I had entered this house to expose was slowly becoming impossible to understand, and for the first time since I had engineered the $10 million debt, I was no longer certain that I was standing on the right side of the board. There comes a moment when following orders becomes harder than questioning them. I did not expect mine to arrive on a rainy Monday morning. The estate was unusually quiet because most of the senior council members had traveled downtown for a private financial summit. Damien remained behind, preparing for an afternoon meeting with representatives from several charitable foundations. From the outside, it looked like another routine day. Then my encrypted fountain pen vibrated once inside my jacket pocket. Nathaniel never contacted me without reason. Hidden inside the library, I unlocked the message using the tiny mechanism concealed beneath the pen clip. A short sentence appeared across the miniature screen. The council is moving too early. Delay Damien. We still need access. I read the words twice. They were not a warning, they were an instruction. Nathaniel did not care whether Damien succeeded or failed. He only needed him alive long enough for me to finish collecting everything hidden inside the coal organization. A second message followed. If Damien disappears today, every door inside the organization closes forever. Do not let that happen. My pulse quickened. For years I had believed every order served a greater purpose. Now they felt painfully calculated. Damien was not a human being in Nathaniel's eyes. He was simply a lock that had not yet been opened. I hurried through the hallway, rehearsing dozens of believable excuses. By the time I reached the front entrance, Damien was already stepping toward the waiting sedan, while Marco reviewed the day's schedule beside him. If I interrupted without evidence, Marco would become suspicious. If I obeyed Nathaniel, I would only be protecting a mission I no longer understood. Yet if I ignored the message entirely and Damien walked into something Nathaniel considered dangerous enough to delay, I might lose the chance to uncover the truth forever. I stepped forward before uncertainty could stop me. Damien. Both men turned. Marco immediately narrowed his eyes, surprised that I had approached without invitation. Damien looked at me patiently. Is something wrong? I searched for an explanation that revealed nothing and accomplished everything. Please postpone today's meeting. Marco frowned. Why? I shook my head slowly. I cannot explain it. I only know that waiting an hour would be wiser. Marco looked unconvinced. That is hardly a reason to change the chairman's schedule. I expected Damien to thank me politely and continue toward the car. Instead, he quietly studied my face for several long seconds. Finally, he closed the folder in his hand. Delay the departure by 1 hour. Marco blinked in surprise. Based on what? Damien answered without hesitation, because my wife has never asked me for anything before today. The driver received new instructions, and the meeting was pushed back exactly 60 minutes. 43 minutes later, Marco's secure phone rang. He answered, listened carefully, and his expression immediately hardened. The investment summit had dissolved into chaos after several outside executives unexpectedly withdrew from a confidential negotiation. The proposed agreement had collapsed before it could even be presented. Marco ended the call and looked first at Damien, then at me. If we had arrived on time, he said quietly, we would have been pulled directly into the middle of it. Damien turned toward me. How did you know? I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to admit that another man had orchestrated far more of my life than I cared to remember. Instead, I answered with the only truth I could safely offer. I believed waiting was the better choice. Damien held my gaze for another quiet moment before nodding. Then I am glad I listened. He offered no further questions, no suspicion, only trust. That simple response unsettled me more than any interrogation could have. Over the following days, something inside me continued changing. Damien began asking for my opinion during ordinary conversations. He invited me to review a charitable foundation's annual report, after learning I understood financial statements better than I had ever admitted. I stopped pretending to misunderstand business discussions. I stopped hiding every instinct Nathaniel had spent years sharpening. Without realizing it, I had begun making choices that belonged to me instead of the carefully constructed identity someone else had designed. One evening, I overheard Damien quietly speaking with Sophia in the hallway outside his study. I think I misjudged her, he admitted. She is far more capable than she ever allowed anyone to see. Sophia smiled. Maybe she finally feels safe enough to stop pretending. Their footsteps faded into the distance, but the words remained with me. Nathaniel had taught me how to become invisible. Damien, without even trying, had begun giving me something far more dangerous. A reason to become myself. Secrets rarely collapse all at once. They unravel one thread at a time until there is nothing left to hold them together. I should have recognized the warning signs sooner. Marco had stopped treating me like harmless furniture. He no longer walked past me without paying attention. His questions became casual but strangely precise. He asked how often I visited my father. He asked why I preferred writing with the same old fountain pen instead of the expensive gifts the family had offered. He even asked why I seemed to understand financial headlines better than someone who claimed to avoid business altogether. I answered every question with careful honesty, wrapped inside harmless omissions. It was enough for everyone, except Marco. One rainy evening I returned from the library and immediately sensed something was different. The bedroom door stood slightly open, even though I always closed it before leaving. Nothing appeared disturbed. My dresses remained perfectly arranged. My books rested exactly where I had left them. Yet my instincts refused to quiet themselves. Someone had searched the room with professional discipline. I calmly walked toward the window before opening the jewelry case, where I kept the encrypted fountain pen. It was still there, but it had been placed at a slightly different angle, less than half an inch. Most people would never have noticed. Nathaniel had trained me to notice everything. I did not touch it. Instead, I quietly closed the case and left the room. 20 minutes later, Marco requested a private meeting with Damien. They entered the study together and remained inside for nearly an hour. I did not need hidden corridors or ventilation panels to understand what was happening. The game had finally reached the moment every operative feared. Suspicion had found a name. Shortly after dinner, Sophia knocked gently on my door. Her smile looked forced. "Damien would like to speak with you," she said softly. "In the West study." She hesitated before adding, "Whatever this is, I hope you tell him the truth." Those words stayed with me during every step down the hallway. Damien stood beside the fireplace when I entered. Marco remained near the bookshelf with his arms folded across his chest. Neither man spoke immediately. The silence itself felt like another question. Damien finally placed my fountain pen on the desk between us. "Marco found this hidden inside your jewelry case," he said quietly. "It is not an ordinary pen." There was disappointment in his voice, not anger. Somehow that hurt more. I looked toward Marco. His expression remained unreadable. "We also confirmed that your visits to your father lasted much longer than reported," he continued. There were unexplained gaps in the security logs. Damien met my eyes. "Who have you been talking to, Ivy?" I had imagined this conversation countless times during my training. Nathaniel prepared answers for every possible accusation. Deny everything. Redirect suspicion. Protect the mission. Yet standing in front of Damien, none of those rehearsed lies felt possible anymore. I slowly took a breath. "If I answer honestly," I asked, "will you let me finish before making your decision?" Damien nodded once. "You have my word." I closed my eyes for only a second before opening the door I had spent years keeping locked. The $10 million debt was never real. Neither man moved. My father did not accidentally lose his business. I created every financial step that led him there, every contract, every transfer, every loss. I built the debt because I needed a reason to enter this house without anyone questioning why. Marco stared at me, as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. Damien remained completely still. I forced myself to continue. The marriage was part of a larger operation. I was sent here to uncover evidence hidden inside the Cole organization. Marco stepped forward. So everything was a lie. I turned toward him. At the beginning, yes. The room became impossibly quiet. Then I looked back at Damien. For the first time since we had met, I allowed every mask to fall away. But what I have learned about you was never part of the plan. I expected to find a man driven by power. Instead, I found someone carrying responsibility that no one else wanted to carry. I expected to expose a monster. Instead, I watched you protect people, even when it weakened your own position. That was never supposed to happen. Damien never looked away. "And now?" he asked. My voice almost failed me. "Now I do not know where my mission ends, and where my own choices begin. But I do know one thing." I swallowed the weight gathering inside my chest. "The woman who walked into this house married you because of a lie. The woman standing in front of you now is telling you the truth, even if it costs her everything. Every lie eventually demands a price." Mine arrived the morning after I confessed everything to Damien. He kept his promise. He listened until I finished speaking, dismissed everyone from the study except Marco, and never interrupted once. There was disappointment in his eyes, but never hatred. Somehow that made the truth even harder to carry. Marco finally broke the silence. "She manipulated an entire financial collapse. She entered this family under false pretenses. We cannot pretend none of this happened." Damien remained calm. "I am not pretending," he answered quietly. "I am deciding what kind of person she chooses to be now." Before anyone could speak again, the encrypted fountain pen resting on the desk vibrated softly. A secure connection request appeared across its hidden display. Marco instinctively reached toward it, but Damien raised one hand. "Answer it," he said, looking directly at me. My fingers trembled as I activated the connection. Nathaniel's familiar voice filled the room, steady and controlled, exactly as it had sounded throughout every lesson he had ever taught me. "Ivy, I expected your report hours ago." I closed my eyes briefly before answering. "Things have changed." A faint pause followed. "Nothing has changed," he replied. "You simply allowed yourself to become distracted. Transfer the archive. Once the Cole organization falls, your father returns home safely." My heart tightened. "There is no archive proving what you wanted." His tone sharpened. "Then you have not searched deeply enough." I took a slow breath. I searched everywhere. Silence answered me. Then his voice returned. colder than I had ever heard it. Do not confuse kindness with innocence. Damien Cole fooled you exactly the way I warned he would. I looked across the room. Damien remained completely silent, refusing to influence my decision. For the first time in my life, no one was telling me what I should say next. Nathaniel spoke again. I gave you everything, Ivy. I found you when you had nothing. I paid for your education. I trained your mind. I made you into the woman you are today. Without me, you would still be nobody. His words struck harder than I expected, because every sentence carried part of the truth. He had rescued me. He had believed in my potential long before anyone else did. He had shaped every skill that had brought me into this room. For several long seconds I could not speak. Then I realized why. For years I had mistaken gratitude for ownership. I finally lifted my head. You are right about one thing, I said quietly. You gave me knowledge. You gave me discipline. You taught me how to see patterns other people ignored. Nathaniel remained silent. I continued before fear could return. But there is one thing you never gave me. His voice came back, calm but dangerous. And what is that? I answered without hesitation. Freedom. The room became completely still. You trained me to obey, I continued. You taught me how to manipulate people, how to build lies so convincing that everyone believed them. But you never taught me how to make my own choices. Nathaniel laughed softly, almost with disappointment. This is Damien speaking through you. I slowly shook my head. No, that is the difference you still cannot understand. You spent years teaching me what to think. He never once told me what decision to make. Even after I confessed everything, he gave me a choice, a real one. Nathaniel's voice lost every trace of warmth. If you walk away now, you lose everything. Tears gathered in my eyes, but my voice remained steady. No, if I keep following you, I lose myself. Another long silence filled the room. Finally, Nathaniel spoke one last sentence. Then you are no longer my student. I closed the connection before he could say another word. The screen faded to black. No one inside the study spoke for several seconds. Marco looked at me differently than ever before, not with suspicion, but with respect earned the hardest possible way. Damien stepped closer without saying a word. He did not ask me whether I had made the right choice. He simply stood beside me, allowing the silence to say everything neither of us needed to explain. At that moment I realized the mission that had brought me into the Cole estate was finally over, and for the first time in my life, every step I took after that would belong to me alone. The final move in every game reveals who was truly in control all along. The following afternoon, the Cole family gathered inside the Grand Council Hall. Advisors, attorneys, senior executives, and longtime allies filled every seat around the massive oak table. They believed they had assembled to discuss the future of the organization after weeks of uncertainty. None of them realized they were about to witness the end of a story that had begun years before any of us entered that room. Damien stood at the head of the table, with the same calm presence he carried into every difficult decision. Marco stood to his right. Sophia quietly took her seat near the center, her eyes finding mine with a reassuring smile. I placed Nathaniel's fountain pen on the polished table. It was no longer a tool of deception, it was simply the last thread connecting me to the life I had chosen to leave behind. Exactly at 2:00, the large conference screen came to life. Nathaniel appeared on the display, dressed as impeccably as ever, his expression composed, almost proud. He looked at me the way a teacher looks at a student, moments before announcing disappointment. "Ivy," he said calmly, "I hoped you would come to your senses before it came to this." No one in the room interrupted. Nathaniel slowly looked across the faces surrounding the table before returning his attention to me. "You chose emotion over purpose." His voice carried absolute certainty, as though the verdict had already been decided. I met his eyes without looking away. "No," I answered quietly. "I chose truth over control." For the first time, a faint crack appeared in his calm expression. "Truth?" he repeated. "Everything you know exists because I built it. I found you. I trained you. I created the woman standing in that room." I took one slow step forward. Months ago I would have lowered my eyes. Months ago I would have apologized. Today I simply smiled with gratitude instead of fear. "You taught me how to read people," I said. "You taught me how to find hidden patterns. You taught me how to build perfect lies. I paused, letting every word settle across the silent room. But today, I took another breath. I become someone you can no longer control. Nathaniel stared at me for several long seconds. There was anger in his eyes, but beneath it, I saw something unexpected. Loss. Not because he had failed to complete his mission, but because the person he believed he owned had finally become independent. He slowly straightened his jacket. Then this conversation is over. Before ending the connection, he looked at Damien one final time. Take good care of what you have won. Damien answered calmly. She was never something to win. The screen went dark. No celebration followed, no applause, only silence. The kind of silence that arrives when everyone understands they have just witnessed something far more important than victory. Damien slowly walked toward the center of the room until he stood beside me. Then he turned to face the entire council. Months ago, he began, I told someone in this family that $10 million had bought me a wife. Several council members lowered their eyes. They remembered those words. So did I. Damien looked at me before continuing. I believed money had solved a problem. His voice remained steady. Today I understand there is one thing money has never been able to buy. He gently reached for my hand. Character. The room remained completely silent. She walked into this family because of a lie, he continued. She stayed because she discovered the truth. That took more courage than any decision I have ever made in this room. If anyone questions why Ivy Chen stands beside me today, let the answer be simple. She earned her place, not through a contract, but through her choices. No one objected. Even Marco gave a quiet nod of respect. The meeting ended without another debate. As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the estate gardens, Damien and I stepped outside together, leaving the noise of the council behind us. For a while neither of us spoke. The breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers through the stone pathways, and for the first time since our wedding, the silence between us felt peaceful instead of distant. Damien glanced at me with the faintest smile. If you had known the truth from the beginning, he asked softly, would you still have walked through the front door of this house? I smiled and shook my head. No. He laughed quietly, pretending not to be disappointed. Before the silence could settle again, I reached for his hand. I would have knocked. He looked at me for a moment, before laughing in a way I had never heard before. Light, genuine, completely free of the weight he had carried for so long. Together we continued down the garden path, leaving behind the $10 million lie that had brought us together, and walking toward a future built on something neither of us had expected to find. The simple truth that the most valuable things in life are never bought, only chosen.